This week, we cover stories about Scientology whining in court over the Bixler Lawsuit. We also talk about the independent Scientologists who are out and about protesting in Los Angeles against Scientology, and David Miscavige returning live and in person to the International Association of Scientologists yearly event in the UK this year. All of this and more in After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical. Hello and welcome to After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical, the weekly show where Tony Ortega and I go over Scientology news as reported on Tony's Substack in the last week. Hey, Tony, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Chris. Great to be here.
Yeah. Boy, always a good time. Always something happening in the world of Scientology. And this week, a few things. In going over your reporting for the week, I thought we would talk about the fact that there was, it's always step-by-step progress on these things with these lawsuits, but there was this step forward and full transcript provided in the Bixler lawsuit on that one, yeah?
Right. The Bixler lawsuit is the one that was filed by Danny Masterson's victims against Danny and the church over harassment.
Right.
Not over the rapes themselves, but over harassment. And it was filed back in 2019, but it's been on hold during the criminal case. And now that Danny's been sentenced, then we all anticipated this lawsuit would get going again. So there was a hearing recently, and that was supposed to be the point. And it turned out that Scientology attorneys said, no, we don't want the lawsuit to get going again. Mm-hmm. And they had various reasons. And I had somebody there at the courthouse that day that took some notes for us. And I initially reported about it. And how the judge had kind of warned the Jane Doe's attorneys, like, I'll get it going again, but there's a downside to that. That was kind of an interesting thing we talked about last week.
Yep.
And then a couple things happened after that, after I reported on that hearing. First of all, I noticed that Scientology had also filed this document about wanting the judge to not take judicial notice about the Tom Mesereau sanctions. And we talked about that, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But another thing that happened was that when the judge wrote up his order, and this is just one of those little routine things, he wrote, okay, so we got the lawsuit going after both sides agreed. And Scientology's like, wait a minute, we didn't agree, Judge, that's a mistake. So Scientology I would think most attorneys would just let it slide, like, who cares? It's only a minute order. But Scientology, or rather David Miscavige, saw that and threw a fit. And so they submitted a whole motion pointing out to the judge, it's not true. We want you to change the record to reflect that you got the lawsuit going over our objections. And they have a point, Chris. It is true. Maybe the judge should add a line, whatever. It's no big deal. But as I'm looking through this thing, and I noticed that in order to make their point, they included a transcript from the hearing, which, I get a hold of those transcripts sometimes, and they cost me some money. So it was nice to see it sitting there. I hadn't even asked for it. So here they had supplied the transcript, and I knew, your viewers, my readers would find it interesting to actually. It puts us in the courtroom. We get to see how the judge speaks to these attorneys. We get to see how the Scientology attorneys speak for themselves, and I just always find that really fascinating. I like to get a sense for how things are going in the room, and I just thought it was really interesting. I thought he handled things really well. I thought he handled the Scientology whining really well. You get the sense that this is a judge who's not going to be caught by surprise too much, and he's going to be ready for the moves they're going to make. So that's why I just thought it was valuable. I thought everyone else would want to see it too, to see exactly what the judge said about things. And he talked about, be careful what you wish for and things like that, and talked about the timing of the lawsuit and that kind of thing. So there were some interesting details in there. And it's always interesting to see the Scientology attorneys, of course, put on their act. I mean, they're always so hurt. The church is so abused, and it's always funny to see how they try to pull that off. And that didn't really go anywhere with the judge. So that was fun. I knew people would enjoy seeing that document.
Absolutely. A couple comments I had to make on it were that in going through the whole thing line by line, it's very clear the judge is really trying to make sure that the defense understands, that I could almost comes across like, are you really sure? I really want to make sure you understand this. And they were like, yeah, we're going to go do it. Right. And then I think he was almost surprised that the Scientology guys were like, well, we don't really know and the whole basis that I had to comment on this, the whole basis of their reasoning for not moving forward is the assumption or the assertion that there's going to be an amended complaint filed. And the judge was so funny because he was just so matter of fact about it. He was like, well, there's no amended complaint right now. You got a complaint right in front of you. How about that one? And they were just, and it's like, that's the complaint you guys are going to be moving forward on. So, in other words, their protests were just so much thin air. There was just nothing there, literally. And I like the way the judge dealt with both of them.
You see this in litigation in general, whether you're talking about a Scientology case or any kind of a case where attorneys ahead of time think of 3 or 4 backstops. It's like, Judge, my client wasn't even there. And if he was there, he wasn't doing what you think he was doing.
That's right.
And if he was doing what you think he was doing, he didn't do it with an intent. You know what I'm saying? They always have those multiple levels. And you could see that Scientology had thought through 3 or 4. Well, if he won't hold it because Masterson saw the Fifth Amendment, let's complain about the amended complaint. If that doesn't work, let's also complain. There was some other argument they were making. I can't remember. But they had, you could see they lined up 3 or 4. And they will line those up whether they make any sense or not, just hoping that one of them actually works. I think that's how it works in court. And hey, look, they're being paid to find a way to slow it down. And they did their best. And the judge said no, because the plaintiffs, the victims of Danny Masterson, want to get it going again. And he was saying that makes the most sense at this point. I mean, the thing was filed 4 years ago. It's about time this lawsuit got going.
Exactly. It's interesting also to note for people out there, you might not necessarily think about it or think about the law or the practice of the law this way, but I was recently become aware of this kind of myself a little bit, that not every lawyer is going to make the same arguments the same way. There's so much to interpretation in this, and what you're paying for when you're paying for the high class guys are those 3 or 4 layers of preparedness and the quality of what those arguments are going to be versus your cheaper lawyers who may not necessarily know what the hell they're even talking about. So interesting stuff. Moving on now, there was another thing that we also did discuss last week, but I had some more on this. You had a new story about it in terms of the independent Scientologists physically out in real life protesting Scientology at Big Blue in Los Angeles. What was the update this week?
Yeah, I don't always pay a lot of attention to protests, but I thought this one was worth pointing out because it was so unusual that it was independent Scientologists, which usually are people that were in the Church of Scientology and left, but they still like L. Ron Hubbard's ideas. They still like to do auditing, and they are offended at what the Church of Scientology is doing with Hubbard's ideas. And so they went out there to protest. It was a small protest. But I was contacted by one of my readers who said he was going to be out there with a camera, and I want to make sure people know it was SP Spanglish, by the way. I neglected to credit him the day it first came out, but I corrected that. SP Spanglish was out there. He recorded it. He actually talked to Victoria, and she had said some interesting things. And, I just thought, look, at the least, it took a lot of guts to walk right down L. Ron Hubbard Way, holding signs, and telling the Church of Scientology to stop abusing people. That takes guts. Mm-hmm. Now, the reaction I get in the underground bunker, and I don't know what kind of reaction you get with your viewers, but it's really mixed because I have a lot of readers who are former Scientologists, and they are looking at the big picture saying, I don't know, independent Scientologists, is this thing really worth saving? So I called her up a week later to see how she was feeling about it. And she was feeling good about it and said she wanted me to put the word out that they want to hear from Scientologists who have ideas about how to improve the church. So, I put up her email address. What the heck? Look, again, I give her credit for the bravery it took to walk down L. Ron Hubbard Way like that. But I understand the people that say, look, why are you trying to salvage L. Ron Hubbard's mess? It doesn't make much sense. So they kind of get a mixed reaction from my crowd.
Yeah, and I think mine as well, and rightfully so. I mean, this is a controversial topic, and there's trauma involved. We're talking about a trauma community when we talk about the ex-Scientology world. So it's not like everybody's like looking at this through this, very clear, no experience with this, completely objective viewpoint, right? Me included. And I've said that from the beginning. I am not objective on this topic, but I will say, after years of research on it, there ain't nothing there. It's not anything to reform. And I addressed this in detail last week on my Q&A. So, but I will also step up and say, good on them for stepping up, for showing up, for doing something about it. They're not just talk on the internet in some forum. And I think that counts for something. And I'll give them that,
Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you did a podcast this week with Conley, the Liz Conley?
Trish Conley and her sister Liz.
Yeah, what was that all about?
Yeah, Leah Remini and Yashar Lee had gotten a hold of that picture of Julian Schwarz that was used in the Danny Masterson trial. Mm-hmm. And they published it. It was the first time we've ever seen a picture of Julian Schwarz online. And Leah, in her piece about it, mentioned that he was the sort of notorious figure at the center of this daycare scandal. Well, that's a story I did years ago. And my source was this mother who was one of the mothers whose kids were involved in this daycare scandal. And I called her Ellen. We weren't going to identify who she was, this mother, but she was the only one of the mothers that did cooperate with the prosecutor to try to prosecute this 17-year-old. And the other mothers wouldn't, because Julian Schwarz convinced them, don't press charges. Mm-hmm. So that was a very important story. I know it was important to Leah. Lisa Marie Presley called me up afterwards and said how much she cared about that story. And she was outraged that the Church of Scientology had tried to hide this scandal involving a molester. And so years go by, and now Julian Schwarz is in the news again, and Leah's mentioned that story. So I called up Ellen and said, hey, it's been a while, but I wanted to see if you've got any thoughts. And she said, there are some new updates I want to give you, and I think I want to identify myself now. And I got to tell you, that's rare. That doesn't happen all that often. When somebody is part of a story and their name is kept back, they don't usually change their mind about that. So I thought that was great. And so I wrote a story about that Ellen is actually Trish Conley, who's a very good friend of Leah Remini's. And she's a former third-generation Scientologist. And then she started telling me this incredible story. I mean, I knew some of her life story. I'd written some of it before. But, that she and her sister were still having so much problems with their parents who refused to see what's going on with Scientology, and it's ripped their family apart. So after I put that story out, I said, hey, do you guys want to come on the podcast? And they said, yes. So I thought that was really remarkable to hear Trish and Liz talk about what it was like to grow up in Scientology, very tight with some celebrities like Kate Ceberano in Australia. And then we're back and forth between LA and Australia, how their parents were just completely dedicated to the Sea Org and not to their kids at all, which is such a common story in Scientology. And how they've struggled with it into their adult lives, and how, it's been so hard on their family that their parents just won't see anything outside Scientology. And also, they really believe that Tom Cruise's close relationship with Kate Ceberano is part of the reason why their parents would just refuse to see anything except what Scientology wants them to see. So we got to talk about all of that. I thought it was really brave of them to come on camera and talk about these things on the record. And Trish has expressed a desire to do some more. So hopefully we'll get to talk to her again soon.
Excellent. That's great. That's really good. I think it's also a sign of the times, and the fact that Scientology's been, I say this, and I never want to say this with the intent of making less of the threat that Scientology very much is. And, Masterson's victims, Leah Remini, all of this has been broken down. You're going to hear more about just how vicious this group can be. And yet at the same time, it's never been safer for us ex-members to stand up and speak out as ourselves.
It's true.
It just is. because there's so many of us, they can't get all of us. They just can't, and they have to focus their efforts. So, so this is very encouraging. I'm very happy about that whole story.
I mean, people are still facing consequences. Trish and Liz would not have done this if they hadn't already decided that they'd reached the breaking point with their parents.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is, I know some other ex-Scientologists that I talk to privately who would like to come out publicly, but they just are so worried that it's going to affect what little relationship they have with the other people in their family that they just can't. So,
Yeah, exactly.
yes, it's a safer environment for people to come out, but it's an individual basis because Scientology still has so much power over their family members.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's always context specific, always, right? And people have to make their own decisions. Okay. And speaking of decisions, so it looks like Miscavige might have made a decision. We have this other story this week, and this was kind of an interesting one with the upcoming International Association of Scientologists yearly event. What's happening with this?
Several weeks ago, I started hearing from a couple of my sources in England who were telling me, Tony, the IAS is coming back to East Grinstead. And I was kind of like, what? Because for those of the newer folks, Scientology historically has had 4 big events on the calendar that wealthy Scientologists are all encouraged to go to if they can. January, New Year's Eve in Los Angeles, L. Ron Hubbard's birthday around March 13th in Clearwater, Florida, a week on the free winds in the Caribbean in June or July, whenever they have their maiden voyage anniversary. And then in October, this big party in East Grinstead in a big tent at St. Hill at the UK headquarters in England. And, each one of them have a slightly different flavor, but they tend to be kind of very similar in some ways. And the reason why the one in October at the IAS was a big deal was that was when Miscavige would recognize the big donors with new trophies. And so it was a celebration of the people that had given millions of dollars. It's also when he hands out the freedom medals to 2 or 3 people that are considered the most active, successful Scientologists. Big deal. Then the pandemic hit. And so since March 2020, any events they've had, they've kept at the Fort Harrison Hotel in Clearwater, where basically where Dave has been holed up for the last 3 years is at the Fort Harrison, at the Flag Building, at the Hacienda Gardens, basically in these little Clearwater locations. His wings have been clipped for 3 years. So when I started hearing that they were going to return to IAS in England, I was kind of like, are you sure? I'm not sure about that. But then Apostate Alex, our friend over there in England, got a flyer that said, yes, IAS, November 3rd through 5th, so a little later than usual. But I assume, they got a lot of things to get together. They got to get the tent and the backdrop and all that stuff. And you have to assume it's going to feature David Miscavige because you wouldn't have a major event like that without Miscavige himself.
That's right.
I called Mike Rinder and asked him, or I emailed him. I emailed Mike and said, hey, is this possible? Is he going to go over there after he's been hiding in Florida? And Mike made a good point. He said, if Dave is going to return to international events, that's the one to do.
Yeah.
Because it has the highest security. He can fly in Tom Cruise's private plane into this private airport, get in a vehicle, and be at St. Hill without anybody seeing him.
Yep.
So it's got the best security. And then, of course, the St. Hill compound is pretty big, and you can keep protesters away from what's actually going on. Whereas with the shrine in L.A., I mean, that's much more of a security nightmare,
Oh, yeah.
So he said that made sense. And so, okay. And then also he made the point that this gives Dave the opportunity to counter all the stories that have been published in the last year about Dave on the run, Dave evading process servers, Dave hiding. This is him out on the stage saying, here I am, So it's going to be a big statement for Scientologists. But I'm curious to see, how big a crowd can they get? That's a big tent. And they're very creative about how they film it. It always makes the crowd look much bigger than it actually is. And is he going to get 1,000, 2,000, 3,000? I don't know, but I mean, it's always in that range. It's never like, I mean, they claim to have millions of people, but of course they can never get a crowd of more than a couple thousand together at any one time. So that'll be interesting. I know people over there seem like they're very excited. I talked to Pete Griffiths about that on our group therapy podcast. Yeah, it's interesting to think that he's going to do that and kind of make that statement. And I think the wealthy Scientologists will just eat it up.
Oh, absolutely, they will. This is really important for them. Just from this, just to comment on this, because my thing, right? Just from the psychological perspective, it really is important. This is not a small thing. These events, the meet and greet, the shaking, the hand contact, the social the sociality of talking to Miscavige in person, and he's laser focused on you, kind of like imagine Tom Cruise is, right? It's like when you're talking to him, there's nobody else in the room kind of thing. They soak that stuff up. This is what they are there for as whales. And this is how Miscavige also sort of serves to re-up their morale boost in Scientology, because believe me, some Scientologists have been taking some real gut punches over COVID, being away from the church for a while. This is, this thing about thought reform and indoctrination and stuff. Here's the little secret, right? It mostly only really works if you continue to do it to the person. If you move them off, it kind of starts going away. So this is going to be a big deal for him, and it should be interesting if any process service can catch up with him anyway.
Yeah, I doubt that.
I know.
American litigators are going to spend money to send somebody to
Of course not.
But, the last time they had it there, in either 2018 or 2019, I should look up my own reporting and remember. But Tom Cruise not only went, but he brought Isabella and Connor for the first time.
That's right.
So, it'll be real interesting to see if he comes to this one. Then, of course, then the poor tabloids, how are they going to spin that as Tom leaving if he shows up at IAS? That's going to be tough on them.
Exactly. And Miscavige is going to want that. He's going to totally want Tom there.
Yeah, I'm sure he would, and Tom Cummins, Trish Duggan, Jim Bridgeforth, Grant Cardone, all the big whales. Oh, the Fabos Factor. Of course, sadly, Doug Doring won't be able to attend, but all the other whales, they should be there to pick up trophies, and that would, convince the rest of the Scientologists, like, oh, things are great.
That's right. Be interesting to see also what, if any, of the celebs show up. Nancy Cartwright.
Tom has shown up a few times in the last 10 years. I don't think a lot of the other celebs go to IAS.
No,
I remember, they used to, they take these photos so they could make the crowd look gigantic. And then they take these gigantic photos and compress them down and put them on their website. Well, you can actually get them out of the website and blow them up. And we did that one time, and that's how we were able to see that Tom Cruise and John Travolta were in the front row at a birthday celebration a few years ago, and it was the first time I'd ever seen them both at an event together. Mm-hmm. The biggest celebrity turnout of all time, I think, was the 2004 IAS, mm-hmm. when Tom got his Freedom Medal of Valor.
Yep.
And the picture of that front row is legendary because you got, oh my God, Ann Archer, you got Tommy Davis, you got what's her name, who's now Chris Masterson's wife. I mean, just it's there's a lot of and James Packer is in that front row.
He was then okay at that time, right?
So that, I mean, that particular IAS had quite a celebrity row, but the last few that they had, I don't remember there being a few. Mm-mm. You know who went to one of the last ones before they quit for the pandemic? The Austrian artist, what's his name? Helmwein? Gottfried Helmwein, who's always denying that he's a Scientologist. He was at that event. We've got his picture off the website.
Wow. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, because of course TMZ's not being let in there.
Well, that's the other interesting thing about IAS. I don't know if you remember, but about, I don't know, 9 or 10 years ago, a Sun reporter got into one. and
I don't
came
remember
out
that.
and wrote a story about what it was like at the IAS event. And I remember we were all like, "Wow, what a coup!" And then the story disappeared from the website.
I'll bet it did. I'll
Yeah,
bet it
I'm pretty
did.
sure Scientology came down really hard on
Real hard. Real
literally, and
hard.
that was you trespass, whatever. But that was Pete and I were talking about that because he's like, I still have the print version. And I said, yeah, the print version's cool, but it's interesting that they took down the online version.
That must be one of the other reasons, because they're how security insane they are, right? How paranoid they are. And now it's to the point where you can't even get into those events if you can't present your IAS number or
IAS card, right?
it's that.
See, Chris, I think that's why they're building L. Ron Hubbard Hall.
Mm.
I really believe they're building L. Ron Hubbard Hall. So then Miscavige is going to declare all events happen there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's going to be a big ass, beautiful venue.
Yep.
And he's going to say, this is dedicated to L. Ron Hubbard. This is where we should have our events. But really, it's about security.
That's right.
They could totally control that. And that I don't know. I just have this guess that after that thing opens, if it ever does, that they would then announce all events happen there from then on.
Absolutely. And maybe the only one I would think of that they might make an exception for, just because of the tradition of it, might be this UK IAS thing, which can be just as controlled security-wise. But even that's just total conjecture. I think, if anything, I would say you're absolutely right, all events. Because that's the whole point. And that security factor is not a small thing for Miscavige anymore. Maybe at one point it wasn't, but it sure is now.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was our week in review. Interesting one. Now, of course, I'll put out there for everybody. You've been seeing on the screen there Tony's Substack address. Go ahead and subscribe to that to get your daily notifications. And as I'm always want to say, Tony, any preview, anything at all you want to say about this coming week?
Just to say, some real fun stuff came in this weekend, some recordings of stuff. I haven't even had a chance to go through it, but it looks juicy. So hopefully later this week, we'll see some stuff popping.
Excellent. All right, folks, keep out there, keep aware, keep your nose on the ground, and or ears to the ground or whatever, not your nose. Anyway, and with all of that, we'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.